Hey, small groupers, Steve P here. As I like to say, the other Steve. I say small groupers and I immediately think, well, that's a fish. But actually, a fish is perfect because you may know in Greek, the word for fish is ichthus. And in the first century, it was an acrostic, each of the letters spelling the word fish, that represented a sign and symbol for Jesus in those days when it wasn't always wise to proclaim one's affiliation. So I'm here to chat a bit about ritual and sign and symbol and meaning as it relates to worship, which is, we say, the core of our life here at Christ Church. Many of you probably know that my full-time gig is not being a church musician at Christ Church, but actually I'm a college professor, and I've been doing that for 28 some years. And I love teaching. For an introvert, it's quite strange to find myself loving being behind the lectern and engaging students and being obnoxious and stimulating and hopefully insightful and inspiring. A lot of my courses are now in cycles, like every other year. And so this fall, the course that's up in my grad program is Theology, Liturgy, and Worship. Sounds fascinating and stimulating and inspiring, doesn't it? Not. But actually, we're grappling with not so much the complex vocabulary and theology and stuff. I just like to take the students on a journey and make the case for God. So yesterday actually was September 22. Not sure when you all will be viewing this, but it happened to be the autumnal equinox. And the equinox, besides being a very pricey high-end gym, is also a phenomena in our solar system. And you probably know an equinox is when the center of the sun is precisely above our equator. And it happens twice a year, autumn and spring. And interestingly and oddly, the vernal equinox has something to do with how we set the date for Easter each year. How unsophisticated of us postmodernites still doing something as pagan and primitive as using the course of the sun around how it functions in our planetary system to set dates. So we also have an online program, and so there's a woman probably about my age, maybe a little younger, who's getting her master's in church music, and she lives in Cincinnati. And she's a character, which causes me to smile because I love characters in my classes, get to play off of them, play on them, play with them. And she told the class right away that she had done some dancing yesterday at the precise hour of Greenwich time when the equinox occurred. And I thought, go, Janet, that's an awesome thing to be doing. And it turns out there's some organization that wraps itself around the world, and they've been planning this online. They do it twice a year, and sort of simple dance is sent around to all the members. And then from all parts of the globe, she said everywhere but Antarctica, at that precise hour, no matter what the local time was, they were all outside for the most part, dancing. And I thought, wow, what an extraordinary thing, because that's like a gazillion years old to be doing something like that. And again, in our sophisticated postmodern times, how could we still be doing something so primitive? Except I found it so lovely, and she found it so meaningful. Not so much the dancing around at 11:30 her time, but doing things that brought her together with other human beings all around our globe, our island home. So one of the places I begin the course with is in primitive times, and maybe we could even go so far as to say before the Enlightenment times. There was a balance between logos and mythos in how we human beings understand our place on the planet. You know, these giant existential questions which maybe have brought some of you to church in the first place, such as, why was I born? Why are there humans on this planet? What is the meaning of my life? Am I just a biological organism that is born, lives, and then expires? These ancient questions. And for the Greeks, logos was a way to use the mind to solve things rationally, to build things, to create practical things, utilitarian things. But in balance with that, and not better or worse or more valued than the other, was mythos. And that was a device, a storytelling device used to help us understand not data, but the mysteries of our universe and our human existence. And of course, in our postmodern times, we really are disdainful, actually, of myth, because it's not accurate, it's not scientific. And of course it's not accurate and scientific. It's a tool to use to understand things that are inexplicable. The book I use is called A Case for God by Karen Armstrong. And it can be a little bit dense, but it's just a fabulous survey of how, since the beginning of human time, we've searched for answers to these questions right up to today. Cultural understandings of how we sort of create God and in our understandings. And she says this: a myth was never intended as an accurate account of a historical event. It was something that had, in some sense, happened once, but that also happens all the time. I love that. In some ways, that's what our worship is about. It's not reproducing like a newspaper account accurately week after week, this formula that brings us into the mystery of God. Actually, it's myth-telling in the sense that we're telling our stories constantly over and over again, trying to get at the truth that God wants us to understand. And of course, we'll never solve these mysteries, but the great joy and the great challenge of life is the search. And the journey is home, so to speak, journeying, searching. And then, of course, at some point, we will be back home. And as Paul promises us when he says, now we see through a mirror darkly, then reality whole and face to face. And the things we've been searching for may be revealed to us. I thought I wanted to be sure, as a good teacher, especially in these times, that I was able to include some images in the things I had to say to you. And one of the great places for me in terms of taking students is a cave in southwestern France that is 17,000 years old. Not the cave, of course, but what's inside the cave. And the caves are called Lascaux, and they're these sort of primitive sites all over southwestern France and eastern Spain. And this particular cave was discovered in 1948. Sorry, 1940. And it was discovered by a French mechanic, 18 years old, and he was out walking his dog, Robot. I love that his dog in 1948 had a name like Robot. The paradox, dog is anything but robotic, unpredictable. So as these wonderful sort of stories of discovery often go, the dog disappears down a hole. And the guy returns with some buddies the next day to see where the dog had gone for so long. And they discover this fantastic set of rooms that were covered with more than 6,000 images, mostly animals, but interestingly, quite a number of abstract signs. Really interesting to me. You'd think there'd be humans. You'd think there might be fertility goddesses, a pair of breasts, somebody obviously pregnant, but only one human-like figure in Lascaux, and even that figure has a bird head. It looks very anime and very modern to me. Actually, in fact, when Picasso toured the cave, he reportedly said, "Oh my God, we've invented nothing," meaning the drawing was such a essence of how one could draw and capture, say, animal energy. It's interesting to me now that as archaeologists explored the caves and photographed it, and by the way, if you are interested, there's a terrific website, a French website, and actually you can go inside the cave and use your cursor to move around, and the paintings are on the ceiling, the walls. And what's interesting to me is now they're labeled with things like apse and not mosaics, that's Christ Church, apse and nave, sort of church imagery, that this space probably was where very important rituals occurred 17,000 years ago. One of the things I love is, and this is not only Lascaux but other caves, are handprints. The way a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old will put their hand on a wall or on a table and spray something around it, and there would see their own hand. And it touches me so deeply because this is you and I needing to be self-identified. Here's me. I don't know if it was the painters of the cave that left their signature before writing, of course, 17,000 years ago, using their own handprint. And again, how odd is that, that the handprint today is a great identifier, way of identifying an individual, for example. Hey, it's me, it's Steve, I'm here. I need to be noticed, I was born. Here's my Steve-ness, here's my hand. And you know, we find ourselves in worship. We find ourselves through ritual. So I invite you to go into a place that connects us with our forebears. I love this notion of opening a family album. I use that over and over again in virtually all my classes. And in some way, again, what worship is just opening our family album week after week and hearing our stories and looking at those figures who've gone before us, and Abraham and Isaac, and Sarah, and some fantastic stories, of course, especially on the Old Testament, although I guess a resurrection is a pretty fantastic story as well. So I like opening the family album. And so we see those who've gone before us seeking and searching to answer these big questions. And this is how they chose to do it, in a kind of chapel of animals. And you could read about this, and the animals, not by happenstance. They think the parade of animals has to do with mating seasons, has to do with the seasons outside, a way of understanding our environment. Again, painting on the ceiling, which presupposes some kind of scaffolding. How sophisticated is that? And of course, I immediately think of the Sistine Chapel in Rome, and another example of searching for meaning, religious meaning, spiritual meanings through beautiful painting and marking on a sacred space. They didn't find a lot of artifacts in the caves. You might expect mountains of bones, human bones or animal bones, and maybe over the years, who knows how long the cave had been undiscovered before Robot finds it. But they think, actually, they found some shells that appeared to have animal fat had been in them, and they think they were used to, like candles, to light the space. And of course, I love that because candle lighting and darkness, these are the elements of rituals and mystery. And they actually think the way the animals were painted on the rock surface was, again, not accidental, but the flickering light of the shell with the fat in it created sort of this 3D effect. Again, how fabulous and sophisticated is that kind of thinking? But what I loved the most is that in one of the chambers was a reindeer bone. I think perhaps a tubular bone that may have been a part of an antler. And they discovered the bone has 3 holes bored into it. And of course, that implies that this instrument, this bone, was an instrument, like a flute. And so these are the things that help make worship at Christ Church. Candlelight, beautiful surfaces, ours glitter as well. And music used to help unlock mystery, not logos, although logos is used in crafting excellent music, sophisticated music, but just the mythos side of our trying to understand the mysteries of our existence. So yeah, that's a lot of talking from me. Now you know what my classroom is like. It's been a pleasure to think about these things with you. And I would say just one last thing. I've been at school 28, 29 years. I've been at Christ Church, I think 27 years. And speaking of mysteries, I don't know how that happened and never dreamed I would be at one church for over a quarter of a century. It's a sign and a symbol of the power, personal power of my partnership with Steve, actually. Typically, we have a 9 o'clock service in a beautiful, small, cave-like space. And the chapel service is Eucharistic. There's always the bread and the wine and a little bit of ritual around that. And I've never, ever given that away. And all this time, meaning with an organ scholar, it'd be easy for me to say, I don't want to be at church that early. I want to prepare myself for the main service of the day at 11. And I've never done that because it means so much to me to worship in sort of this simple, lovely, short service where I really don't have much responsibility except to play around on the piano, which I enjoy. But ritual and worship, the one thing that we have that is so powerful is, of course, the bread and the wine, and Jesus just saying these simple words, do this in remembrance of me. So worship away, again, like the family album, of remembering. And I would say the minute the wine-soaked piece of bread touches my palate, I know, dare I say it, that I am loved beyond my wildest imaginings. So now I say, thanks for this time together, and what a pleasure to share these thoughts with you.